Approval of the mid-year budget adjustment, Dr. Bell.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Thurman, board members. You will see in your package a document which we have come to call the T-sheet that we started using after I got here, which divides your targeted budget management procedures into the left side of the T account, which is anticipations, which is revenue, and the right side of the T account, appropriations, which is expenditures. On June 25th, the board voted unanimously to adopt a budget of $821 million. Adopted the budgets of all the other funds in the on a consolidated sheet for special revenue, debt service, capital outlay, school nutrition, trust and agency, in a total amount adopted of $1,354 million. What I'm talking about today is a mid-year slight correction of about 1.1% on the $801 million budget, okay? And we did this very successfully last year. For the first time, the school district made some corrections at mid-year. And what that does is it causes us to really examine our cost centers and to make a correction if we have to on revenue or on expenditures. The document in front of you today employs, the first page of it is the revenue side. It employs the end of fiscal 14 fund balance amount of $40,968,000. The analogous number on June 25th was like $20,007,000 was our, at the time of that point, was our estimated, very conservatively estimated fund balance for the end of 14. As you can see from the first page, which is the anticipation page, which is the revenue component, we're saying that we would like to employ, and I'm going to go back to the last page of the monthly financial report. If you go back to that page, when our measurement focus was compared to our projected position, not last year, but our projected position, we're ahead by $30,709,000. We'd like to employ, of that $30,709,000, $8,874,000, okay, to do the itemized corrections at mid-year, okay? And under the board policy CDL, we're also taking $10 million of the amount we had on projections at December 31, and we're committing that by December 31, 15, excuse me, by June 30, 15, we want to add to our $40,968,000 fund balance to bring that up to at least $50 million or $51 million, okay? So that's the commitment line per policy DCL, okay? Then the arithmetic result of if all of this comes true, and please keep in mind we're a number of months ahead of the end of the year now, okay? And we know that there are thousands of variables, but I have an experienced staff. I talk to the tax commissioners regularly about, and they've done this for years, where we could be going in the next 4 or 5 months, okay? The arithmetic result would be that if all this comes true, okay, we should have a projected operating surplus of about $15.5 million, okay, as of December, excuse me, as of the end of this year, which we would have some flexibility in raising the fund balance as we go into 16, okay? We're coming out of the recession. The tax digest, we structured the budget this year on a 3% growth. It's going to probably be closer to 4 or 5 or 6, okay? That's the upside. That's why we're seeing collections ahead of projections, okay? So as I said, the first page is just the anticipation page. People that do this for their careers will tell you anticipations deal with revenue, okay? So appropriations is the second page, okay? You can see that on June 25th, the board voted to appropriate $800,144,000 to spend, okay? As of December 31st, we had spent 40-something% of that, okay? But in managing to the budget, it's like driving a ship. I drove a ship in the Navy for a number of years. In managing to the budget, okay, you're going to have to turn the ship every now and then. And so the second page is a listing, line item listing of things that we're asking y'all to approve that total, that $8,874,000, that's additive on the first page, okay? And so that would be about a 1.1% change in the head of the ship, addition to the budget. It would take the base budget from $800,144,000 to $809,019,000, okay? If we spend all of that, that would not be my goal. As you have heard me say, we need to spend between 92 and 96% of the budget, and we need to collect 100 to 103 or 4% of the revenue. That's how you grow the fund balance. If you do that year after year, you should have some discretionary revenue that you can do certain things, such as adjusting salary schedules and that type of thing. So that's the presentation of the 2 pages of the mid-year adjustments. Like I say, it's 1.1% of the original budget.
Is there, thank you, Dr.
Sir.
Bell. Is there any discussion? No one? No discussion? Do you have Mr. Jester?
On the first page, the revenue and anticipations,
Yes, sir.
you have a footnote, $2.5 million assigned. Can you discuss what that footnote's about?
Certainly. In a prior board meeting, at the direction of the superintendent, he requested that I, following a board policy that is extant here in the district, assign a certain component of the fund balance, okay? And we executed that assignment per the superintendent's direction. The policy gives him the explicit power to do that. My recollection is that $2.5 million was to deal with exigencies that may occur in the event some outside city attempts to annex some part of the unincorporated DeKalb County District.
Gotcha. And is that $2.5 million reflected in any of the other numbers?
It's not reflected in any expenditure numbers, Mr. Jester, because it's not in an expenditure posture.
Okay, so this is just a side note that's what
It's-
we're doing in the ledger.
Well, that's correct. In the spirit of full disclosure, we put it on there. We knew y'all had recalled the superintendent directing me to do that. It is up inside of the fund balance, okay? But before any component of it could be spent, an item would have to be brought to the board for its approval.
Gotcha. Well, along the lines of that expense, I just want to warn the administration about the Georgia Government Transparency and Campaign Finance Act. That's OCGA 2151 that basically allows certain activities and prohibits others. And I want to make sure that we're well aware of that before we break any laws there on that. Just a heads up on that. The charter school line item, can you give us a little more idea what that's about? Charter
Yes, sir.
school budget adjustment?
Yes, sir, certainly. The originally struck budget, we had set aside, or the board had approved, $29,891,000 for our charter school activities. We have a number of charter schools. We got 9 startups, 5 conversions. It's a pretty big operation. In that 29.8, we'd actually added $800,000 for Tapestry, which is a startup school, which is difficult when you're dealing with the startups because they say they have a certain enrollment. They say, what that will come in at. But you have to make, under the way the state of Georgia does this, projections for months and months before you actually get any actual information out of the state. Okay. So our best budget was $29,891,000 at the point of June 25th. And we based that on the state allotment sheet for FY14. In June of 14, we got the state allotment sheet for FY15, okay? And what had happened was some of the schools' enrollments increased, And the value per FTE also went up, okay? And so the recalculation that we've done indicates that for us to get to the end of the year and not overspend in charter schools, we need to add this requested amount of $1,759,059 for charter schools.
Gotcha. And the FTE count for everybody is October, right? Well, it's the first one of the fiscal year, which is to say we have a decent idea of how much the schools will require by the end of October.
By July, okay, we should.
Gotcha. So just another heads up, there's an FTE count at the end of October. I don't think we do any kind of presentation on with the FTE counts at various schools. I think that would be a relatively simple discussion to have.
I think that's inaccurate, Mr. Jester, but I'll have Dr. Preston, who leads that effort, who's done an outstanding job over the last 2.5 years, and it has resulted in literally millions of additional dollars being brought down into our district, which is feeding really the fund balance. So, Dr. Preston, you may want to brief the board on the steps that you've taken at least over the last 2 years regarding improving our FTE count and evaluation and verification.
Good afternoon. I just want to say what we do with the FTE count, we meet with every single school in the district to talk to them about FTE and to train them on how to maximize our FTE within the district. That was one of the things that, thanks to Mr. Thurman and his leadership and the board, allowed me to go out to each individual school and work with them to make sure we're maximizing FTE at the same time lowering our class size. So we are doing a much better job of gaining our FTEs in every school, and every single school is being trained. Actually, that's why I was a little bit late today. I was at a school going through with them on the FTEs and how to maximize FTEs and how to bring in more additional staff into the district. That way we're lowering the class size, but at the same time, make sure every single staff member is funded correctly within the district. So we've done a great job with that of making sure we're getting out into the schools and working with our principals and our system principals, and more importantly, our schedulers, because that's where in the schedule, that's where the rubber meets the road as to if you're going to maintain your academics and also maintain your funding. So we've done a pretty good job of doing that this year.
Fantastic. And I know you've sent me documentation before, and I think if the board had that same documentation, that would be extremely, extremely helpful. That's one of our largest, if not the largest, source of revenue. So if you could just disseminate that information, that would be extremely useful.
Yeah, we'll be happy to do it. Yeah, I was a little alarmed when you said that we're not doing anything, which was your first comment.
Sorry. No, it's just not being reported on. Well, there's no agenda item that I'm aware of that discusses the FTE reports.
Yeah, we've not received a request, but if you
well,
have a
this is it.
request,
I'm requesting.
I understand. So once you request, then we respond.
Fantastic. Hey, thank you, Mr. Thurman. Title I comparability payment. Can you talk about that?
Yes, sir, we just did during the monthly financial report. Comparability, some people say comparability, some people say comparability. When I was asked the question about the $491,000 by Dr. Irwin, okay, that shows what we had paid during December for comparability. The bottom line, the $1,191,000, is our estimate of the 491, which, as I said earlier, our experts assert that's the right number. The state has a different number, and an estimate of the 15 liability for comparability of about $600,000. So that's the $1,191,000 is both years, 14 and 15.
Is that money? Is that money that goes back to the state, or does that go out to the? What? I'm not sure where that gets dispersed to.
It's an assessment penalty that we pay to the state. We wire it to them. They take it and they look at it for a while, and then they, if I've been informed, send it on up to the federal government.
Is there any way to avoid that penalty?
We have a lot of meetings and a lot of discussions, and yes, sir, I mean, it's a very complicated process. Dr. Preston is one of our internal experts, okay, but yes, we're trying to.
And Dr. Bear, if I may, that's what I mentioned. The state has evidence of willingness to reopen negotiations on this matter, and I feel very positive about it, that we will come to an agreement as to a number that we think is fair and equitable, and we received a communication to that effect last week, which is what we discussed during Dr. Bell's earlier presentation.
Gotcha, because 1.1 million is a lot of money that I sure would love to see spent in the classroom. In retrospect, I mean, we've been doing Title I for a long time. Was anybody in particular held accountable for these penalties?
Well, what really happened is the state 2 years ago, and Dr. Preston, you may want to speak to that, Dr. Beasley as well, the state began to calculate the numbers differently. And Dr. Beasley, you may want to speak to that.
Yes, sir, Mr. Thurman. Good afternoon, everyone. The state, prior to last year, the state basically allowed districts to self-report the numbers. Therefore, you didn't have many comparability penalties. Now that the state is actually pulling in the data electronically through the CPI report, the numbers basically speak for themselves. What we submit through that process is impacting the comparability. You ask, is anyone held accountable? HR, finance, Title I, budgets and allotment, we all work together to ensure that, first of all schools are funded at par, equitably, and then, of course, being a very large district, we work diligently to ensure that Title I funded staff is in addition to what is provided locally. Clearly, when you have many moving pieces, there's always the potential that you may have some situations where it appears that someone was hired here on this campus and that may have impacted your equity ratios. And again, that's what we work to ensure is minimized, and then of course we work to mitigate that when it does occur.
And I'll add, what's really driving the issue in DeKalb County, and I'm repeating myself, is our long-standing commitment to provide high-quality educational and support services for children with special needs. And the state is just now recognizing that and how it impacts these two different programs under two different sets of laws and rules. And what we're having to do is to really integrate the thinking, and the state is beginning to recognize, and we're not going to back off in any way, form, or fashion on our commitment to educating children with special needs, come what may. And I think that's a commitment that this district has made for decades. And we've shared that with the state of Georgia. But I'm encouraged that the state now is beginning to recognize that it's not a matter of mismanagement or oversight. It's just that you're comparing apples to oranges. You're comparing staff and teachers at a school with high percentages of special needs kids, which is greater, with schools that have lower percentages. Is that fair the way I'm saying that?
Yes, sir, that is correct. And if I could add, Mr. Thurman, we're also comparing very large schools to very small schools. And our district, we've had a commitment historically to very small schools, if you will. And so that also creates a situation for us when it comes to staffing. Dr. Preston is excellent with what he does. I've not seen anyone who is more detailed than he is. However, the truth of the matter is every decision relative to staffing impacts comparability in a very large district. And so the penalty is because we as a community, we have bought into supporting our students being educated in the least restrictive environment, which means that sometimes it appears that we're providing staff members which may impact the equity ratio. But we have to work to monitor that, and in this situation, we receive the penalty.
And I shared that, Mr. Chairman, with representatives from GDOE. Because of our commitment to providing services to children with special needs, I've raised the concern that there are those who will take this fact and try to use it as a negative to allege financial mismanagement or lack of oversight, when really it's a commitment to helping children with special needs.
Is this commitment going to cost us another $1.1 million next year?
If needs be, and this is what I've said, and of course, while I'm here, if this is what it takes for us to continue our commitment to children and parents with special needs children, so be it. I think the state is going to rethink their position, but this is a commitment that I don't think that's negotiable when it comes to this population of students.
Ultimately, I'd like to see the board make a policy decision on that. Thank you.
Would this impact, would this situation be impacted by the influx of students from outside of the DeKalb County school system getting training inside the school system?
This situation is impacted whenever student enrollment increases at a school and staff has to be provided. And that, clearly, there are no consistent patterns at times. Things, when students land on the campus, principals have to have the staff there to serve the students. And that's why all of us, HR, finance, Preston, Title I, we're all there working to ensure that staff has been identified to serve those students. And that's just ongoing work, as Mr. Thurman has already shared. And anything, any enrollment, increases in enrollment or decreases, when you compare Title I schools to non-Title I schools, potentially that could impact the ratios as well.
And to the chair's inquiry, there are parents who move into DeKalb County, particularly parents with special needs kids, who move here because they know that we provide a higher quality service in the less restrictive environment. We do a much better job, and we all know it, and we're proud of it, than most other school districts in this area with the population. But that's nothing that we've done. That commitment was here long before any of us sat in the position we're sitting in. We're just trying to maintain it and actually improve it.
Mr. Orson?
Before I get to my questions I had, this is one of the comments you made about our interaction with Georgia DOE, but I keep hearing that ultimately this is an issue, a federal issue, because it's Title I, and I assume also IDEA. Is there a pathway for us, because we're depending on Georgia DOE to be our messenger ultimately to the federal government, right? Because they're the ones have to be satisfied on the penalties we pay. Is there a pathway to engage also federal DOE? Because I'm a little uncomfortable, no disrespect to our friends at the Gold Dome and related, and Sloppy Floyd, that I think the argument and the position you've taken makes sense, but if it goes through a filter, I'm worried that it may not get the resolution we need. So that's not the set of questions I had, but I'd love to have a little tiny discussion on that first. So.
Well, and you're absolutely right, and there have been discussions with people who know people on the federal level. And I don't really want to go much further.
Okay.
But we're hopeful that we can resolve this because, you know, we don't want to escalate the discussions
Right.
or even the disagreement right now. I'm very hopeful that we can get it resolved at the state level. But as you say, obviously, there is a federal path, and I know people like yourself know people in Washington who might be engaged to assist us, but I'm almost certain we won't need to do
Okay.
that. Although we do have all the phone numbers and
Okay.
email.
All right. Now let me get to a couple of small questions I have that have to do with the T sheet, as you refer to it. The first is, and this is just a little point of clarification. I see behind the T sheet, and this may be for you, Mr. Thurman, the information about school nurses, as you know, a topic, but I don't see the budget item in the T sheet. So I just would like to know about the timing of that more than
Well, oftentimes in the budgeting process, some items you leave for your bosses to make a determination as to whether or not it should be included in these allocations. But upon your direction, we asked Dr. Tinsley, who's here, to go out, and we engaged in conversations primarily with Dr. Samuel Ford and about providing additional nurses in our middle schools. And we provided the information, and of course, it's up to the board to make a determination about if there's some desire to include it in the mid-year adjustment, or is it a next fiscal year issue? But Dr. Tinsley, do you want her to kind of go into it?
Well, I think so it's a possibility now, but then correct me that based on the projected 80,000 yearly impact, that really for this fiscal year, because we're 7 months through it, it would really ballpark perhaps be about a $400,000 impact, plus or minus. Is that
assuming
correct?
we get it all up and
Right,
going?
right. So there's
probably
good
even
time.
less, by the time you get it.
So
going.
in terms of its impact on these recommendations, it would be less than the fully costed out impact.
This fiscal year, that's correct.
Okay, so that is something that all right, so that was my first question. Second, again, this has to do with academics, because it was a question I raised last year, and I don't think I've ever seen an answer. which is about us looking at the projected costs for extending IB at our 3 IB high schools to 9th and 10th grade. We discussed last year in the context of this T-sheet that we do not have a fully articulated IB program, which among other things has an impact on our school choice program, because kids who are in our middle schools for choice for IB fall off the path because we're not offering it as a choice option in 9th grade. And so I've never seen, and I've seen, quite frankly, I know firsthand impact on students from Druid Hills Middle School who are not able to go to the high school because of the lack of a choice path. Even if we don't have it for here, I still would like to get that information and to see if at some point we can incorporate that, because I think it's appropriate both from having a robust IB program, but also because of the bearing it has on the choice pathways for students that disproportionately affect students who are trying to find a different option, and we seem to be, inadvertently curtailing that. So that would be my
We'll
second.
follow back up with let me meet, and
Okay.
then we'll get you a detailed explanation.
That would be great. Two more things then. The third, and Dr. Bell, you sort of alluded to this as we start looking towards the next budget, but we had a discussion a year ago, and nobody's behind. I just want to remind about beginning to try to experiment with zero-based budgeting in some of our departments. I know that you sort of referenced the fact that this mid-year adjustment gets us back into some of these budgets to see if they need to be adjusted. But we had a broader discussion about introducing the notion of zero-based budgeting and starting at least at some department levels. And I don't want us to get to May and then say, oops, we don't have time to do that. I mean, that, as you know, is a more lengthy process if you're asking people to build their budgets from zero. And I think the problem with any large organization, I don't care who, private sector or public sector, is you just get things baked into a budget over 25 years that if you look back, I mean, I was at a Fortune 100 company, and we'd look at things and say, why is that in there? And because it was in there 25 years ago, and nobody took it out. So I'd love to hear maybe at our next meeting what that plan might look like in terms of how many departments we might try to do this with and so forth, because we've never had a more detailed
What was the
discussion.
decision made by the board? I can't remember.
I thought we had consensus that we wouldn't do it full scale, that we'd do it on kind of a beta basis, and we'd pick some areas in which to introduce this. And we discussed that at our retreat, if I recall.
Okay. If the board would provide us clear direction, because then, obviously we'll comply and respond. But I know we talked about
Right.
it, but I don't remember specifically what we were directed or which.
Well,
how
I think we
were
left a
directed
fair
to.
amount of discretion to you all, was my recollection, that you'd come back. So we're going to point fingers at each other. I think that, no, I'm kidding. I just think that's why I'm bringing it up now, so that we don't get to a point where it's too late. And if we don't have time right now, that we be mindful that by the next meeting, I would defer to you to at least come back with a first suggestion about what that would look like. And then one more overall comment, which was the one thing, and I understand a lot of these expenses, and particularly if they go to charter schools, they are what they are because they're just recalculations based on and instruction. The one thing that concerns me is that we have an opportunity before us to try to put some additional money directly towards our teachers and staff, and that these adjustments don't reflect that. And I understand we have all sorts of things that come in, but I am concerned that whether it's in the form of salary or going back to a question I asked legal counsel last month in the form of retirement contributions, because one of the things I wanted to make sure was that if we elected now to begin anew retirement contributions, it wouldn't have an impact on our legal standing in our current litigation. And the answer I recall being that it would not, that those were separate issues. The overall budget here concerns me that we are not, where we have an opportunity, and we have some additional funds, and I get the balance we have, that we're not taking an opportunity at least to put some of this money towards our staff.
Starson, if I could just say, I've been the CFO of a large city, a large county, and now a large school district. And one of the things that's been impressed upon me is local educational budgeting has parameters built into it that, will somewhat hold you back from a pure ZBB approach, okay? such as the comparability issue we were just discussing. That's a staffing issue. In essence, we're being told that we didn't staff certain non-Title I schools comparable to the Title I schools. And so you're sort of compelled to spend money at a previous level. Mr. Jester has asked questions since he's been here about the 65% target for direct classroom expenditures. We're at about 62 now. We got a waiver last year. So you have some limitations in this local educational financial structure that, yeah, if you do a big zero-based thing, you end up with 10,000 decision packages in your office to try to work through in one night, okay? But there are firewalls in local education where it kind of delimits you from going all the way.
And I understand that, but you also know, you've been around a lot, at every organization, based on their, particularly the larger they are, sort of put up, and I don't think there's any bad intent, it's just how organizations run, that we don't revisit certain propositions. And so, yes, we know, for example, that we are a very labor cost intensive business. It's the nature of education. You can't replace a significant part of your cost with capital investment. However, I think in any budget that has just sort of been redone year to year over a long period of time, that it behooves us as an organization, if nothing else, and I've raised this issue with Mr. Williams, that he may have an organizational structure that's a reflection of how we did business 25 years ago. He's shaking his head yes, so he probably knows this. That he's kind of constrained as best he can from optimizing it because there's no time and there hasn't been a process for revisiting how he's structured. Organizations that 30 years ago, our buildings weren't as old, so our facilities maintenance might not be as much a priority as construction. I mean, those are the sort of things that change that I think introducing the notion of some zero-based budgeting here might help us overall with our organizational efficacy. And I think what I'm advocating for, and I thought we had some at least consensus, is finding a path, at least try it, figure out what the obstacles, to your point, are for an organization like this, and then that will allow us to make a broader policy decision in terms of how we might implement it on a wider basis.
Yeah, and with the direction of the chair and the board, we will look at it and the components of it. One missing element is a financial system that we could actually use to develop the budget. We don't have it. Much of what's asked sometime in great detail ignores the fact that the district has, for the last 10 to 15 years, not invested in the latest software. And that investment is something that we're getting ready to make, but it has not yet been made.
And I support, as you know, I support
And I
that,
know
because
you
I
do.
know, I think you need systems that will support the kind of tasks we ask you, and I know we're going to have to muddle through some of this, but I think it's also a little bit of a mindset issue, and I don't mean it we just as big organizations sort of get stuck in how they do, and sometimes you got to encourage them to change. As you know, you were in the Navy, right? Re-steer the ship a little bit, if not a lot.
Mrs. Turner?
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me if I don't eloquently make my point because it's been such a while. I've been trying to get a word in, so I might have forgot. But I'm going to go back to when Mr. Jester was asking questions, and I want to, for clarity's sake, because I'm not clear. I'm the new kid on the block. Now, we receive as board members our books that contain this information. It's a couple of little updates that we get when we get here. And so we have the opportunity to go through these books and to gather questions. Now, this is my understanding, so please, if I'm wrong, forgive that. And so I've been told that I have the opportunity to go through the superintendent's office for any question, for any clarification that I have with regards to the department head's reports. And so this here is my copy of all the questions that have transpired in just the last week or so. So I keep all those because I try to study them. And so most of the questions here have been asked today. So then my question is, why bother asking the question via email if we're going to come here and ask the very same question? Unless the purpose of asking the question for this audience is for the sake of a broader audience, as in the television cameras. I don't know. Because if we are getting the answers to the questions, or if we don't have enough time to get the answers to us, that's another situation. But from what I have compiled here, and it's quite a bit, all the questions are being addressed unless we're getting information at the 12th hour that we did not get an opportunity to ask. So I say that to say, if the policy has been or the procedure has been to send the information to the board members so that we can review the contents of the book and ask the department heads by way of the superintendents, if that process is broke, then certainly we need to fix it. But if it's not broke, I think that it would lessen the time that we spend on items being very redundant over and over and getting the very same answers. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I'm kind of a simple person. And I just wanted to say that for clarity's sake. If I have interpreted this process wrong, then I would ask my fellow board members to educate me and enlighten me correctly. Thank you.
Ms. Turner, I think you are correct, and certainly, just like anything else, there are different reasons for questions, just like in any normal situation, and that's why I asked Mr. Jester and and Dr. Irwin if we could get a time so that we can iron out not only the language that we use, the programs that we use, and maybe Dr. Bell at that time can socialize us and inform us on all of the details related to what he goes through in developing the budget. And some of us may not know that. I'm familiar with what he does because I'm familiar with budget process. Some may not be familiar with that. So my point in all that is, if we had a day or a time or 2 days or whatever is necessary for us to all understand not only the system that we're using, how he goes about developing the budget and maintaining the budget, so that it would limit our at least questions. And then it'll be up to us whether or not we want to use the public for informational purposes, or we want to make sure that we are asking questions for our own benefit and understanding. But if we all got together in one room, we could iron out all those details at the appropriate time.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
can I ask a question? Okay.
If Dr. Irwin and Dr. Marley, if that's okay.
You go ahead, Dr. Muller. You want to piggyback on Ms. Turner?
Well, sort of, but it was my understanding that we received an email from the superintendent inviting us for 2-hour slots where we can actually partake in some of this. And I don't have a problem with a retreat, but, when we retreat, we're supposed to be retreating to something that's going to be most certainly beneficial. But my thing is that, sometimes what's one man's dream is another man's nightmare. And we have to begin to look at things, to begin to behold, again, I'd like to see the purpose. I'm passionate about education. I'm passionate about what we're doing. And I do agree with Ms. Turner, we have to begin to look at making sure that we're taking a position and not posturing in order to be able to do what we're doing. And also making sure that when we talk about transparency, again, who is it benefiting and what is the benefit of? And making sure, again, as I said, if we're going to educate, we need to be educated. And what might be one person's need for at one particular level, it's almost like you're going to put everybody, so everybody needs to be at that same level. That's not all the way true. So I would like to, challenge my fellow board members to look inside ourselves and be able to take a panoramic view and an inside introspective look at ourselves and see what is the purpose? What is this all about? What is it all for? And I do agree. We have these notebooks. We've had them over a couple of weeks. And if there are questions that need to be asked, and we've never been turned down, anything I need, I've always called the superintendent's office. I've gotten it. I've gotten the answers to them. And so this makes us better informed, because it seems as if we come here, we're not prepared a lot. We're not as informed. And so we're not informed. We can't inform anyone else. And so I think that we have to begin to logically look at the purpose of a board. And I've been on many boards, and this is not the only board I'm on. And so we have to begin to look at the role of a board member. And again, I go back, and I know, Mr. Orson, you don't like the Carvers, but Carver's book, on running boards and what it's all about and how things should be done. I would like to challenge you all to be able to begin to look at that, because this is a time when we're supposed to begin to make sure we're taking care of the business of the county, the children, the parents, the constituents, everybody that's out here, but not utilizing this time just to be able to say we could have the time, just use it, and it's not pertinent. It's not impacting, and we're not a perfect society. But when we look at where we've come from and what we've done in the last 2 or 3 years, we really need to be saying that all of us have worked together, and none of us is great as all of us. So I do agree that we have to begin to look at the reasoning and the rhyme for all of the questions and not taking the time to be able to do that here once a month.
Dr. Irwin?
Back to the T-sheet. I was just looking, well, first I want to thank Superintendent Thurman, Dr. Bell, Mr. Joshua Williams. I see we have possibility of having 6 new bus mechanics coming on board. It's a good thing. I want to look at the auction operating costs. So when we have these auctions, where do these funds go? Once the auction has occurred, are they put back in the budget? Do they help supplement this $175,000?
Yes, actually, we anticipate about $200,000 generated this fiscal year for the auction services that was approved by the board in May of 2014. Today, as of December 9th, we actually receive approximately $105,000. And so we're targeting that expectation as we move forward. And what we're looking for the board to support is having the opportunity to leverage that revenue to be able to offset the operating costs in order to do so. Yes, sir.
Mr. Orson?
I'm glad that Dr. Irwin brought us back to the T-sheet, because I actually have a couple of specific questions, and some relate to your area, Josh, which is, could any of these items be moved to a SPLOST account? And that might require legal counsel weighing in on here, but some of these look to be capital-type expenses, and or if we have the ability to free up what would be operating funds, I think that would be desirable.
I apologize. I was looking at the list here.
Yeah. You know, I see some of the things like security improvements at Panthersville or paving at a parking lot. Some of these things, HVAC, which is a capital good. I mean, I think to the extent, and Dr. Bell may weigh in, I would think it would just be great for us to be able to move some of these things to a SPLOST account if we can be legally compliant.
Yeah.
And I believe we have the available funds.
Yes, sir, Mr. Orson. Whenever we get into this type of a request, in building this document, we consult with facilities about SPLOST availability. So this is a list that we've been told by facilities that SPLOST can't cover these particular items.
But Josh, it looks like you're taking another look at this as we sit here, which I appreciate.
Certainly. What I was looking at was just trying to make sure that I understood what particular items you were referring to.
For HVAC as a capital expense, I mean, if we were a for-profit business, we would capitalize that expense.
Sure.
Since SPLOST is set up for capital expenses, it would seem to me that it would meet the definition for, but again, that may be also legal counsel to weigh
And what
in.
we've done is the emergency HVAC purchases that were in support of the start of school were relative to those unique schools in which the vandalism took place.
Right.
Wherein we had capital projects that were ongoing, of course, we leveraged those dollars in order to make those improvements. None of the schools that were assessed as part of that emergency were already approved under the referendum for the SPLOST program.
No, but
So
we
we've
have flexibility
assessed
on that. When we have excess funds, the law provides us the flexibility to make additional commitments, even if we haven't approved a SPLOST project. That's what we've operated on the basis of those local school priority requests are essentially the nature of kind of ad hoc additions to, or utilization of SPLOST funds, I should say.
I would lend to legal review and follow up on that.
We'll take a look at that, but as Josh stated, if it's in that SPLOST referendum, then they've allotted those funds for that. We'll take a look at the emergency dollars.
Right. So whatever we do today, I'd like to, however we word it, if we pass it, to maintain the flexibility for us if we can shift those funds based on opinion of legal counsel and obviously budget and facilities determining that funds are available, because we don't want to do what the past has done, which is spend money we don't have. Then the one other thing, and Dr. Johnson, you can sort of lead me here, which is I would like to make a recommendation that we put in an up to amount for nurses for this year, knowing that we wouldn't need the full allocation, maybe perhaps in the range of $400,000. so that the process for beginning to staff our middle and high schools with nurses can begin this year. I think I think that would be the most, given that we're already 7/12 of the year, and really for purposes of the school year, we only have 4 months left. Would you be comfortable with that, Mr. Thurman?
Oh, no, we put it there.
Right. No, I know.
For
It was a rhetorical question.
I got it.
So, and I don't know if you need to poll the board, since I know we generally try to get to a consent agenda to see if there's any
But to your
objection
question,
to that.
yeah, I mean, it's up to the board.
Right.
Obviously, there is a need. We all agree that there
Right.
is a need. It's an area that has been unaddressed historically in the district, and it will be up to the board direction. We would embrace it if given the opportunity.
Okay.
So you're asking for a poll from the board to determine if, in fact, the superintendent should bring back a recommendation?
Well, I'd like to actually then, I guess, amend this to add an additional up to $400,000 for the engagement of nurses at middle and high schools for the remainder of this year. That way, I think it covers the maximum. I actually don't think we'll probably get to the 400,000.
Mr. Chair. Can we have the superintendent and the CFO to look at this, and maybe HR, and then begin to see whether it needs to be actually allocated or where it should be, instead of just making that decision right here, right now? When you're the board and you're somebody's boss, there are not too many times you're going to go against what they're saying, and so that's a proper thing to do. But I think that too many times we come here and we want to make these rash decisions. I think that there needs to be something looked at, and I agree the nurses should be there. But I think that, when you put someone on the spot and said, can we do it right now? Let's go ahead and do it. You're the board and I'm your boss. Hey, what am I going to do? I'm going to sit back and say, go ahead and do this. I would like to have the superintendent,
Well,
CFO?
point of order, there's a motion on the floor.
There have been many points of order, and they've been overlooked.
All right, in terms of the let's address that particular point at this point. And Mr. Orson's point was to spend no more than $400,000 on a nursing budget for the remainder of this fiscal year. Am I correct in that? So all of you would need, we couldn't vote on it anyway. Moved by.
I made the motion.
Okay,
It does
moved
require
by-
a second.
Moved by
Yes.
Mr. Orson, second by
I second.
Mr. Jester. Is there any discussion?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
I kind of would first like to hear a timeline for how you would get this program started. How much time would it take? Because that would kind of influence how much money you're going to spend. Is that true?
Dr. Irvin, you went right to where I
Okay.
was thinking. What I would like to do, now that we have some idea, if this is the will of the board, to have Dr. Tinsley to look at what might be able to be done within a $400,000 budgeted amount. It's something we've not looked at for the remainder of this year to see if, how it can be done. And by next board meeting, we could bring it back to Dr. Morley's point. We will have shared it with Dr. Bell and Dr. Tinsley, and then we can make a more intelligent recommendation. Now that we have some general outline as to what the board might desire to be done in the district. Is that fair?
That's fair. The other thing I want to say is that I have been diligently, ever since Mr. Orson, that we discussed this during the last term about nurses. Every time I've gone to a doctor, gone somewhere, and I say, DeKalb County needs nurses. And I get the feedback, you all don't pay enough. So I think that due diligence would be, as Mr. Thurman is saying, for us to be able to look at this, see what Dr. Tinsley finds out, then be able to come up so we can make sure that we are competitive enough in being able to carry this out, so that we don't say 400,000, then we come back again, we have another discussion, more money and all of that. So I would just like to see it be done in a proper manner rather than just saying up to a certain amount, because it may take more than that. And how do you decide who gets them and who doesn't get them at this particular time?
So am I hearing the board say that at the next board meeting, the superintendent will bring a recommendation regarding nursing for the remainder of the year?
I'm not saying that yet, because I'm basing it on what was already given to us that's based on our existing salary scale. So I didn't pull the $400,000 out of thin air. I took the fact that we're 7/12 through the year, And the rough math would put you at, if it's 880 for the course of a whole year, if I'm reading this paperwork, if it was 6 months, it would be 440. So up to 400 would cover about it's not even really 5/12, but we have 4 school months. So I understand the sentiment that we would like a plan, but the plan is sort of driven by what we already do. If we want to revisit the overall compensation, which I don't object to for nurses, that's a different discussion, I think, than the immediacy of providing. And if we wait another month, we have yet again gone another month without nurses in our middle and high schools, and it's not an issue we just brought up in the last
I'll
10
defer
days.
to Dr. Tinsley, but one of the issues, actually these two issues do dovetail off one another, because one of our concerns is that if we actually engage the Department of Public Health, they actually will pay more than what we're paying our nurses. So what will happen is our nurses will migrate to so, I mean, it's almost, you might be in a worse position than what you started. So once we set up, if in fact this occurs, the big concern is how these two programs will interface with one another. Because if I'm a nurse right now and someone offers me $20,000 more, then I'm leaving the elementary school to go work for the middle school, which will leave the elementary schools unmanned. Does that make sense? That's why in dealing with a large, complex situation like this, we have to be very careful as to what the cure is. Sometimes the cure is worse than the disease, no pun intended, because we're talking about nurses. But we all agree that our middle schools, we need to come up with some strategy to provide nursing services at our middle schools, but we have to be very careful about how we do it. Is that right, Dr. Tinsley? Am I quoting you correctly? And then
That is correct.
I feel, and I get the little circular that we are subject to the marketplace conditions, but we've always been subject to that, even with and it's one of the reasons I think we have, in a number of schools, we don't even have licensed LPNs. We have clinic technicians, even at our elementary school. And I fully support the notion of us doing a broad-based review of our entire health services. I think goes back to even my zero-based budgeting concept. How do we build this program from scratch? But this need for having care in our schools has been ongoing and long-standing. And I know on one hand, a month is just a month, but I feel like we keep pushing the ball further away, and we're not. And I understand the sentiments expressed, but we're not addressing the immediacy of the issue, which is we continue to have all our middle and high schools unstaffed with a person of that requisite skill.
I hear the request that you're making and concern, and your concern is shared by other board members. I also hear the superintendent with issues related to how that's done and the impact it will have on the system. So can we compromise and say that the superintendent, authorize the superintendent to do a study and come as close to what we've talked about today and bring back next month? Would that be something? Okay. Is everybody
absolutely.
agree with
We
that?
would be excited to do that.
A full plan, hopefully, by then.
Oh, yeah, we're getting there. And I'll say this. I mean, it's when you're dealing with large public institutions, I've spent 30 years particularly dealing with institutions who found themselves at a point of crisis. It seems frustrating, but we are making tremendous progress in addressing some almost intractable issues that have flummoxed and escaped resolution in this district. And it seemed a little frustrating. I want to go back to something you said, though, about salaries. The board last year set as their #1 priority is that we would address salary inequity in the district. That has been the most important issue that this board has directed me to address. The significance of Dr. Bell projecting a $50 million surplus and $15 million in operating surplus projected, if in fact it becomes true, is that in the next fiscal year, beginning July 1st, and I said this to all of my principals last week, you will see significant improvement in terms of compensation for our school-based salary for veteran, highly qualified teachers. But you can't get there till you get there. What Dr. Bell did was projected a fund balance of $50+ million. The worst possible thing we could do is spend it. I trust Dr. Bell, but quoting former President Ronald Reagan, who I never quote, you need to cut the cards first. You need to make sure the money is actually in the bank. And if we continue on this path of conservative management, being conscientious with the dollars that we do have, we made a major step forward with eliminating the furlough days, Dr. Morley, with a 1% COLA this year. Next year, the third year is the year where you really reap the dividends of your efforts when in these turnarounds. It's not the first year, not the second year. It's always the third year. And we're going now into the third budget cycle. We're on target if we manage to the budget direction that this man has projected for us. And we are going, and that was a concern. I met with the principal, Mr. Chairman. I met with him, and we told him, I said, the chair, the board has directed that there is no ifs, ands, or buts. This will happen if we remain patient and focused on what we said is our number one priority. It's going to happen. And I asked the principals to share that with their staffs. We are on record for it, and we're not going to deviate from it.
The last comment regarding this matter will be by Dr. Marley.
And it's going to be brief. I just want to say to Mr. Orson, I think you would agree, you know, when I was coming up, my mother used to say, either you do it well or not at all. And I would like for us to be able to do this well. And we only have a few more months left in the school year. I think if we can really, really do our due diligence, and actually research all this and really have a real formidable plan and roll this thing out, you know, when it should be rolled out, so that we can make sure that all schools are looked at, middle schools, elementary schools, as Mr. Thurman says, we don't want to offer them out at the middle and everybody leaves the elementary, and then we have another problem. It has to be an action plan, and we all know that. I would like to see it be able to roll out that way so we're not backtracking, trying to, it's, as a therapist, it's better to prevent than it is to come back and intervene, and we know that. So when you're trying to do prevention methods, that you're making sure you have all the stop gaps in place, but when you have to come back and intervene, you're cleaning up a mess, and we've got to stop cleaning up stuff and do the things the right way as we go into it. So I would really like for us to begin to look at that in this matter. I believe in the nurses. I'm in the field, and most certainly they're crucial and critical in these schools, and we need to do something about it, but I would like to see of us actually do it the right way.
Thank you, Dr. Marley. Is there any opposition to?
Well, I think Mr. Orson made a motion, and I believe that's still on the table. Or did you withdraw that?
I'm willing to defer to March so that we can fully articulate a plan based on the conversation we've had. But
Okay.
as long as we have a plan, March. So February's a short time.
So you withdrew, okay. Oh, with that in mind, is there any opposition to placing this?
I would like to make a comment.
I'm sorry, go
My
ahead.
second round, as it were.
I'm sorry.
My second round of
Oh,
questions.
go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am increasingly concerned about our reliance on the administration to spoon feed us information. I think we need to look into ourselves and figure out who's managing who on this. And to Ms. Turner's question, I say quite frequently the business of the people need to be done in front of the people. And when we have a work session and business meeting in the same day, it's increasingly difficult to get all that done and collect all the information. Therefore, I think from time to time we give Dr. Bell or whoever a heads up on what we're going to talk about. For instance, Dr. Bell brought up the 65% rule, and he had those numbers fresh on his mind because the OCGA state statute, there's a Classrooms First of Georgia, and it says each local school system shall spend a minimum of 65% of their total operating budget on direct classroom expenditures. And as Mr. Bell stated, we're right about 62%, or that's what he states anyways. And given these mid-year adjustments, the adjustments themselves, do you know what percent of these adjustments, as they are, go towards direct classroom expenses?
Mr. Jester, you asked the same question during the question and answer give and take, and we took a look at the 8,000,008, and I think I responded that our estimate would be about, of the 8,000,008, about 32% could be allocable to direct classroom expenses.
Right, exactly. And after talking with many, many parents, that is not the direction we want to go. I think it would be best if we went in a better direction on this. Find some way to get over that 65%. That is the law. That's it, thank you. That's it. I'm sorry, it's not it.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, Mr.
Jester.
Dr. Bell.
You are aware of the waiver process.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I'm not
Okay.
saying we're breaking any laws.
Okay.
I'm just saying that state legislature has said that they would like to see, and they would like it so much that they passed a law that says to do that. And they also said that if you're not doing that, as you well know, this is how you apply for waivers to get around that. So along those lines, I would like to move that we make an adjustment to this mid-year adjustment, and that we keep all the expenses that go directly towards direct classroom instruction, and we completely remove everything else. And with that money, I would like to fund board contributions to the TSA with the rest of that money.
Second, I think it's always worth us discussing what our opportunities are here.
Moved by Mr. Jester, second by Mr. Orson. Is there any discussion?
Shall I give a rationale? All right. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So, back in 1979, we passed a resolution. The school district has said that we, in the amount that would have required for us to participate in Social Security, in order to get out of Social Security, we will fund an alternate to that Social Security. Furthermore, we said that we will give a 2-year notice to the employees before reducing or terminating those funding provisions. In July 27th of 2009, we gave about a 5-minute notice, and we completely got rid of the board-funded TSA's contributions. And I think it would be prudent for us to use what we said was going to be non-classroom expenses and put that back into classroom expenses by immediately going back to TSA board contributions. Thank you.
Our attorney, Mrs. Bryan.
Mr. Board Chair, I would recommend that we table further discussions of this while we have litigation pending on this matter.
I don't see where this affects. As a matter of fact, I could have sworn in previous meetings we said that by doing this it would not affect existing litigation.
Mr.
But
Chairman, we discussed
we
this
table
before
it-
and agreed to that we would not be moving forward with discussing. And I think that if we have attorneys and we're not going to listen to them, then why do we have attorneys? And then why are we here? And we did discuss this before, and it has come up, and we agreed to do just what they're asking us to do. And we've got to stop letting this board run away with things and do whatever it wants to do and how it wants to do. If we're not going to listen to the attorneys, we don't respect the staff and the administration, then why are we here? And I will no longer be a part of this consistent tyranny here to just disrupt everything that's going on. This is an educational system. We're not here in a court of law, and we need to stop it.
We have a, no, we have a, you made an
No, I
amendment.
think Mr. Orson's next.
Okay, go ahead. Mr. Orson.
So a couple of things, because as I said, I second it because I think all these matters are always worth discussing. We did receive contradictory advice at our previous meeting from your firm that said that it would not, or actually not from your firm. I got it clear. It was from the firm handling the case, from Sutherland, sorry. But Sutherland did give us advice that it would not have an impact on their pursuit of that litigation. So I'm a little sort of stuck here because you're giving us advice, which I respect, and the firm handling the case gave us different advice in the pub. And so,
My concern is that I can't gauge where the discussion is going to go. And I think it would be safer to reserve the matters for executive session, and then if we determine that it's not a matter for executive session, that it's better for open, then we can certainly
okay,
resume that
that's fair.
discussion.
Okay, I didn't understand in the context of that comment. So I'll keep my comments general and not to the matter. I think it is part of our function. You know, one of our plenary authority and responsibilities as a board is over budget matters. It's an extension of policy. And I understand and appreciate, Dr. Morley, your support of the administration's position, and that is well respected. But it is our job as a board. We only have a few essential functions, and the budget is one of them. And I think any board member here, on any matter as it regards to the budget, and particularly when we are reconsidering and changing the budget in some way, has the right to suggest a course we follow. And I think we need to respect that. We're not always respecting that. And this board as a body may decide that the priorities established by the administration are the one they choose to support, and that's perfectly fine. They may slightly alter them. We may end up altering them, as we've seen in the course of discussion by the nurses' discussion, that may change it. I think I would encourage this body as a body politic to focus on the merits of the recommendation and not on the process of whether people make a recommendation, which I think is within the ambit of their authority and their responsibility. I think we will be more effective. And I respect that you may disagree with Mr. Jester's suggestion, and I think that's a legitimate, those are why you come down to priorities and you have a discussion about them. But I think we're on a dangerous path here if we make suggestions that people shouldn't in the first instance engage in the discussion and the conversation, because I think we are then failing to exercise our duty as the governance body with primary responsibility over the budget.
We want to make sure that we follow Robert's rules in this order and as well as protocol. But there's several things that we really should consider at this point, and since we have made it a legal matter, maybe the best time to discuss this would be in a legal situation, and not necessarily the vote, but at least discuss it from a legal standpoint, so that we will not be putting issues out to the public right now that may harm the school system rather than help the school system in that regard. We also had addressed earlier and asked the superintendent to address all of the legal matters relative to saving funds and things of this nature. So in terms of we need to address whether or not to consider this recommendation, and we have had a discussion on it. Maybe we need to vote to table. I would suggest that we table it until we have an opportunity to discuss it in an executive session, not whether or not we should or should not do it, but whether we should table it until we discuss it in executive session.
Well, perhaps I could just remove the motion in general.
Okay, well, but we can always take it up in executive session if that's what you want.
I'm not confident that we could come to a resolution today.
Oh, no, it won't today, but.
Right, so I would like to
just remove
that.
That takes us back to the
I
original.
would, however, like to move that we keep the direct classroom expenses as they are, but instead of the non-direct classroom expenses, that we give the teachers a mid-year raise. I think that shouldn't cause any legal problems.
Okay, is that a second recommendation, or
Yeah, that's a different one. I'm making
all right.
another motion.
you moved it? That's a second. Can I get a second? Second. Is there a second by Mr. Orson? Is there any discussion?
Shall I give a rationale?
Sure.
Well, we've already made the motion, so you'd like to already a question
Call the
on this motion
question.
without any discussion? Dr. Morley? You called the question. Are you calling the question on my motion?
You made the motion, I moved the question.
We haven't had discussion yet. You're calling the question before we have discussion?
At this time, I call for the vote. First of all, I got to get a second. I need a second on the.
It requires a two-thirds vote if she's called the question.
Right, that's what I'm saying. But I was calling for a second before I get the two-thirds vote. Correct? Okay. Who second? Did anybody second? Need a second? I need a second on the question. Oh, on the question alone. Mrs. Turner, second. All in favor? Let me know by show of hands that we're voting on the question, and that is to close the discussion.
Okay. To close the discussion.
Right. 1, 2, 4, 2. All right, now we call for the vote.
What is the vote on?
The vote is on, Ms. You restate it. You restate it, if you will.
The motion I made was to keep all the direct classroom expenses and to remove all the indirect, non-direct classroom expenses and use that money that Dr. Bell proposed and spend that on a mid-year raise for the teachers. And it was called, the question was called by Dr. Morley because she didn't want to hear anything about that.
All in,
I think you're totally out of line, and to be someone new on the board, and if you're for children, I would like to see you come here and really be for children. Start lingering and languishing in stuff. Your personal stuff has nothing to do with it, okay? And so we're not here for this, and I don't engage in this type of rhetoric. I'm going to be respectful, and I'm professional. So whatever your game and your posturing is all about. And if you notice me, I don't ever call anyone's name unless it's something positive I have to say. You can't read minds, and you sure don't understand mine. So I need for you, and I'm going to expect that the chair would enter into this, or there will be legalities coming about. And we've had a board that has run quite well before, and it seems as if you have a personal, whatever the vendetta, whatever your problem is, but I'm asking you to please respect me and put it aside, because we don't go there. We've never gone like this before until you've come on this board. Now, I know what a board is, and I've been a professional for many, many years, and I'm going to be respected and not disrespected. You can have the jester grin, whatever you want, and be one, but not here today.
thank you. Mr. Jester read his recommendation. All in favor? Let me know by show of hands. Those, it fails. The next part, approval of the mid-year budget adjustment. Does anyone have any opposition to placing this item on the consent agenda for this evening? Mr. Jester? No, sir. Okay. So this item will be placed on the consent agenda for this evening.